I decided to celebrate my 80th birthday by hiking the 484-mile Camino de Santiago French route during my 2-month travels in Spain and Portugal in 2024. I took the Turkish air flight from Seattle to Madrid with an overnight stay in Istanbul and arrived in Madrid on April 19, 2024. After a few days exploring Madrid, I headed to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, by first taking a 5-hour train ride to San Sebastian, followed by a 3-hour bus to Bayonne, France, and ending with a train ride to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. It was a long travel day, and the Camino Pilgrim office was still open, so I got my credential used for access to albergues along the path, and the volunteers also arranged accommodations for me to an albergue that had closed for the night. Here are some images of what I saw during my 29-day hike along the Camino de Santiago, where I experienced snow, 14 days of rain, and several windy days. About half of the way was along roads with a variety of landscape changes from open fields, forests, and cities. Of the 29 days hiking, I stayed at hotels in Burgos, Leon, and Melide, and the rest in albergues. I made no advance lodging reservations along the Camino. This legendary pilgrimage is rich in medieval allure. It attracts individuals from diverse backgrounds with numerous reasons to do this pilgrimage. Many for religious reasons and others to achieve a goal of personal accomplishment, to heal mental or physical wounds, to do it to honor a fallen friend or family member, to join with others in a common purpose, to see some beautiful natural landscape and historical buildings and villages, and finally to exercise. There are many paths to Santiago de Compostela. I chose the most popular one, the French route. It is one of life's amazing journeys from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to the beautiful Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, where St. James' remains are buried. It took me 29 days to walk 484 miles. Now begins my day-to-day travel along the Camino de Santiago French route, beginning with a 5-hour train ride from Madrid to San Sebastian. From there, it was a 3-hour bus to Bayonne, France, ending with a train ride to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. From the train station, it was a short walk to the center of town, and I noticed that most stores and albergues were closed. The Camino Pilgrim office was still open at 9 p.m., so I got my credential used for access to the albergues along the Camino. The volunteers arranged accommodations for me and 2 others at the Auberge Zarapeta that had closed for the night. The cost was €31 for a bed with blankets and breakfast. After a chilly night of 62 degrees inside, we had coffee and breakfast and then started our journey. The French route is shown in blue, and my journey was from right to left, ending at Santiago. My first day destination was Roncesvalles, about 25 kilometers away. My ascent for the day would be about 1,400 meters, or 4,600 feet, over the Pyrenees mountain range. On the way to the Pyrenees summit, I joined up with Haruko from Japan, Mickey from Germany, and a couple from Netherlands who were with their teenage ballerina daughter as we made our way up to the summit and down the steep path to Roncesvalles. Haruko and I took a break from the constant winds at the mountain hut just before crossing the France-Spain border, marked with a cattle grate across the path. I later learned that this portion of the trail would be the steepest part I experienced on the Camino. In the Pacific Northwest, it would just be considered a normal trail. After a 9.5-hour hike, we arrived at the huge Roncesvalles Auberge with over 183 beds on 4 floors. Mickey and I did not have reservations, and the only available beds at €14 were in the chilly basement where we took an elevator up to the bathrooms. On my second day, I ended up buying a poncho since it was snowy that morning, with an expectation there would be much more precipitation along the Camino. That was a good decision since it was windy and snowed all day.
I was part of
I stopped in Viscareta village at the Café Juan and had some hot coffee con leche, orange juice, and a delicious potato frittata. It was good to warm up and get out of the rain. After a 9-hour hike, I checked into the municipal albergue called the Antigua Escuela. They cost €14. Since they had no pilgrim meal, I joined others from the UK, Austria, Japan, and the US at the Camino Cafe near the bridge. On day 3, there was no running of the bulls as I passed through Pamplona. I passed by this 12th century ruin near Ilrats. It was raining a lot, so I stopped at the La Parada Cafe just across the bridge for a tasty breakfast and to warm up. I then came into Pamplona, where a milling building was restored, and I walked by the city walls. It was a long walk through the streets of Pamplona, which I navigated by following the painted yellow arrows and the Camino de Santiago icon tiles. I detoured to see the streets where they do the annual running of the bulls, the Plaza de Toros, and the street named after Ernest Hemingway. Here is the street they use for the running of the bulls and the gathering place in front of the government building. Here are pictures of when the bulls are running. Hiking was fairly easy since it was mostly downhill, but I walked 36 kilometers to Zurichkegi only because the 2 auberges and 2 hotels in the earlier town of Saint-Zur-Mineur at 25 kilometers were closed. At the Auberge Andres, I had dinner with Boris, a French guide I'd walked through Pamplona with, and Illa from Sweden, who told us about the bird omens she'd experienced on the Camino. On my 4th day, I got off to a late start at 8:30 a.m. after having an egg sandwich, coffee, and OJ. I ascended to the Alto del Pardon summit that was lined with windmills and the famous Monument to Peregrinos and the Spanish Civil War Memorial. The inscription here is translated to, "Where the way of the wind crosses the way of the stars." This memorial includes a stone in the middle for the 92 victims, and the other 19 smaller stones represent their villages. From this summit, it was a steep descent using my trekking poles for the second time to Astorga, where it flattened out to fields of vetch, peas, and rapeseed. I stopped for water at this public fountain. I used my SteriPen, but I found I did not need to purify my water throughout Spain. I crossed over the bridge and village of Punta La Reina to end my day in the next village, Manaru, where I stayed at the Auberge El Cantero. The lobby included a Knight Templar suit of armor just outside the dining room, where we gathered for a pilgrim meal of lentil soup or salad, pork loin or chicken, ice cream, and bottles of wine for the table. I enjoyed the soup, pork, and water. The dorm was €14 and food 15. I passed through several small villages like Siracui, Lorca, and Villa Tuerta, with Man from China, who now works for Microsoft near my hometown of Kirkland, Washington. In Estella, I stopped for lunch with Siggy from Austria, who had a burger, and Taru from Japan, who had octopus, while I had bean soup. After lunch, we came to the Arachi Bodega, Museum, and Monastery. The monastery had wine flowing from one of the spigots outside the church, along with another spigot of water. Pilgrims were invited to take a sip. It was an uphill journey through many yellow rapeseed and wheat fields until I came to Villamayeur de Monjardin and the Auberge Oasis Trail just as it began to rain. This was the first auberge where the host offered a prayer before the pilgrim dinner. The dinner was kind of a gloppy one-pot Thai curried peanut meal. I hope this is not a trend. The food cost €11 and the dorm 14. On day 6, I left at daybreak with strong winds and ominous clouds. Soon it began to rain, so I pulled out my poncho, and it rained throughout the morning until the bottom of my pants were soaked, as were my shoes and socks. In some places, muddy water was running on the trail. The rains, wind, lightning, and thunder continued on until I approached Santo, where the clouds broke and the sun came out. We enjoyed a frittata meal in the sun in Santo. As I left the restaurant, I again ran into Man, the Chinese woman who lived in my hometown of Kirkland, Washington. We hiked for a while together, but she was a faster hiker, so she continued on. After reaching this summit with these offerings, it began to really rain with rivers on the trail, combined with lightning and thunder until I got near the town of Vienna. The Andres Munoz Municipal Auberge was a beautiful old building, but very cold at €8 per night. At a nearby bar, I had a dinner of pinchos of zucchini, crab meat, and shrimp, and beef with eggplant that cost €10. On day 7, after yesterday's rains, I was pleased to see that the early morning sun brought clear blue skies. The landscape included vineyards and wheat fields, as I made my way past Logroño to Navarrete. Just before Logroño, I passed through one of the few forests I've come to along the trail. Once in town, I found a great breakfast place and helped myself to 2 OJs, an egg sandwich, and coffee. Here's some more Camino artwork. Lots of families were visiting the park surrounding this lake on Sunday. I ended my day at the Casa Peregrino Angel Auberge in Navarrete, where I again had a one-pot dinner. It was a vegetarian paella with mushy vegetables and gummy rice. To clear my palate, I went to a nearby bar and had some tasty pinchos. They were as tasty as they looked. On day 8, I'd planned to stay at one of the 2 auberges in Siricuna, about 37 kilometers distance, but both were full, so I walked another 6 kilometers to Santo Domingo de la Calzada, where there was a large auberge I'd hoped to stay in. I passed miles of vineyards on gentle sloping hills. I really enjoyed this pincho lunch in Navarra. More Camino artwork. The albergue Casa de la Cofradía del Santos had a wonderful bed for me in the attic with old timber showing, and all beds were twins and not monks. I barely had time for some lentil stew, a shower, and clothes washing before lights out at 10 p.m. On day 9, Lindsay, a Scotsman, joined me for breakfast. I thought I ordered pizza, but it turned out to be coquilles Saint-Jacques, which was a surprise but very tasty. After a career as a carpenter, he now makes classic guitars. I passed this woman who was using a walker. She and her friends were from Colorado. Carlene from Colorado and Aisha from Saudi Arabia joined me. Aisha was a teacher who'd visited 100 countries. I suggest she write books for children about her adventures to give little girls in Arabic countries a different perspective of life. Carlene was a family therapist. They continued on while I stopped in Gragnon for more breakfast and to view the cathedral. Vineyards were now replaced by grains, mostly wheat. I got into Belorado at about 6 o'clock and got the last lower bunk at the Auberge à Santiago at the entrance to the town. Lodging was 14 euros. They also provided dinner at 14 euros and a hearty breakfast for 10. The pilgrim dinner was bean soup with chorizo, pork loin, tomatoes and chilies instead of French fries, and dessert was flan. They also served red wine, but I had lemonade instead. The hearty breakfast included fruit, OJ, coffee, eggs, and Sereno ham. On day 10, after that hearty breakfast, I passed through Belorado that was filled with large murals. Once again, the Camino paralleled the highways and this Roman bridge as I headed to San Juan de Ortega. I passed by fields of rapeseed and grains on this cold and windy morning. Once I got to Villafranca Montes de Ochoa, I climbed 1,000 feet to the top of the hills. The scenery changed to trees and large clumps of heather. Some of the sections were burned by wildfires and others by logging. I passed by a memorial honoring those that died in the Spanish Civil War of 1936. The Auberge San Juan de Ortega Monastery had showers with inches of water to wade through to get to the toilets, and microwave dinners for €8. It was a cold night in the monastery, and even colder on day 11 outside with frost on the ground. The Camino has now entered cow country as I dropped down to open fields of grain after passing this cross near Olmos. I again walked with some people I had seen on earlier days, such as Carlene from Colorado and Michael and Ella from Netherlands. This stork greeted me as I came into Burgos. The Camino route was a bit confusing to follow, so I stopped for a burger in Burgos to regroup as it began to rain. The Camino passed by the huge Burgos Cathedral that was started in the 13th century, adorned with many Gothic steep spires. They say it took over 400 years to build. In addition to these traditional statues, I encountered these metal cutout pilgrims that blazed the way out of town for me. After trying a few albergues that were full or closed, I decided to treat myself to a hotel and used Google Maps to find the Azofra at €70 a night. The hotel restaurant didn't serve until 9 p.m., so I ate at the Kebab de Abbas. I got food poisoning, which kept me up most of the night. I left about 11 a.m. on day 12 after recovering. Some pilgrims feel compelled to post their graffiti thoughts along the Camino. After 10 kilometers by the highway, I got to the Tarjedos Municipal Albergue. Rocco, a volunteer from Madrid, promptly offered hot tea and in the morning gave us breakfast. No set fee, only donations here. I met Chris, a retired Australian soldier, and Mickey from Massachusetts, a hardcore marathon runner, including the Boston Marathon. Day 13, Mickey and I ran into drizzle and cold. Chris took a bus because his knee was bothering him. The villages had these big murals. I spotted an ambulance with an injured pilgrim. It was like a foreboding of what I learned what happened to Chris. I was able to keep up with Mickey for over half the day until we stopped for a break of coffee and OJ at the Hornillos del Camino. He wanted to speed up to find where Chris was. Near the San Anton ruins, I met Betsy from New Jersey and her daughter Emma from North Carolina. I would see them several days afterwards along the Camino. I stayed at the Auberge Alteria owned by Olga and Jose, who served us a delicious chicken dinner. After dinner, Grace from South Korea sang Ave Maria.
Mirar cómo va de San, va bajando. Más, más.
Jose gave us a demonstration of how the wine press works by using some volunteers and then taking us into the cellar and offering us some sips of his wine. It was quite an interesting and amazing evening. At the end of the evening, I was saddened to learn that Chris had called Mickey to say that he dislocated his knee and was being treated in a hospital in Lyon, the end of his journey. On day 14, it was a windy day that started out with a 440-foot climb to the Mostelari summit shortly after leaving Castroveres. From the summit, we dropped down to Itero de la Vega, where we stopped for breakfast. It was good to get out of the winds that blew from the southwest at up to 37 miles per hour and have some hot food, coffee, and OJ. I stopped for lunch and got out of the wind in Boadilla del Camino at the Camino Hotel restaurant, where I enjoyed lentil soup with chorizo and flan for 12 euros. From there, the path was level along the Canal de la Castilla as we crossed the canal locks just outside Fromista. It was a short walk into town about 4:30 p.m., but the municipal auberge was full, so I headed to the Estrella, which was a few blocks north. It was a great place to stay with heated rooms, hot showers, a comfortable bottom bunk, and lots of blankets. I got there just before the heavy rains came and stayed the night. On day 15, I got a late start at 8 o'clock from Fromista and shortly crossed the A76 Autovia. The weather was good but windy. After breakfast of potato egg pie in Poblacion de Campos, the Camino ran alongside the Rio Usiza for several hours. Along the trail, they had planted these beautiful blossoming pink tamarisk trees. After leaving the river walk, I had a calamari sandwich and raspberry mango smoothie in Villacazar de Sirga. Betsy and Emma joined me for lunch as we gazed at the nearby cathedral. After lunch, I greeted this fellow pilgrim sitting along the street. After periodically walking with Betsy and Emma, I reached Calzadilla de la Cueza. They had reserved a bed for me at the municipal auberge for 10 euros. I had garbanzo soup for dinner with Jan and Jody. Both women were retired military. On day 16, it was a sunny morning as I made my way to Ladigos for a breakfast of potato and cheese pie along with coffee and OJ. I then met up with Stephen, an attorney from New Zealand, and we walked to Sagun. Before getting into the town center, the Camino took a short detour over to this 11th century church. The town has an annual procession and festival here. I stayed at the Monasterio de la Santa Cruz Auberge, which used to be a convent and is now managed by the Benedict order, and the cost here was just 7 euros. I went to the nearby supermercado for some orange juice. While there, I marveled at the fish counter as well as the wine racks that showed very inexpensive wines. Since dinner at the auberge wasn't until 8, I had some delicious lentil soup and fish dinner at the nearby Astorga restaurant. On day 17, I was over halfway to Santiago, and the trail continued beside an unused road to the La Peralta auberge, where I stopped for breakfast. The Camino crossed under and along the high-speed train routes. The La Peralta lobby had a huge stack of backpacks waiting for transfer to the next sleeping place for the peregrinos who were slackpacking for just €6. I followed three guys I later called the Three Amigos out of Bercianos, and the trail got increasingly smaller over the next half hour. Taken the wrong trail, so we bushwhacked back to the Camino. The Three Amigos were staying with me at the Auberge Gil in Reliegos. They were Greg from California, Zoli from Hungary, and Richard from Austria. On day 18, as the sun came up, I stopped in Mansilla de las Mulas for breakfast. This door of St. James was for the pilgrims traveling on the French route to enter the village of Mansilla de las Mulas. We passed several smelly stockyards like this covered one. I walked with Will, an Alaska fisherman, into Lyon as we navigated the busy road filled with car dealers and other commercial operations. Will and the Three Amigos stayed at the check-in auberge here at the beginning of Lyon. The Plaza Regla was dominated by the Santa Maria de Regla de Lyon Cathedral. It was built in the 13th century and took 2 centuries to complete. It's one of the greatest works of the Gothic style, with its steep pinnacles and expansive use of stained glass windows. I arrived too late to go inside the cathedral, but the outside was spectacular. At a restaurant in the plaza, I had dinner of an avocado mango dish and some deep-fried sea bass with dressing. I stayed at the Inn Boutique of Lyon, just around the corner from the cathedral. After staying at dormitory-style auberges for about 3 weeks, this was pure luxury. King-size bed was soft and luxurious, as was the shower. It was €61 for the night. On day 19, I rejoined the Camino Santiago trail that ran just in front of the cathedral. It took quite a while to get to the outskirts of Lyon along busy roads. Eventually, I found this Coca-Cola decorated breakfast place in La Virgen del Camino. I soon came to this trail split. I chose the rural hike rather than the road hike. I met a few pilgrims who had started from Lyon, and I hiked with them occasionally over several days. Mariano from Argentina, who was soon to be a guide in Iceland, and Sue from Canada. We walked along these fairly level dirt and gravel roads for hours without much change in scenery. Instead of highway sounds, we heard the sounds of these many frogs along the way. After a long 24-mile day, I walked into the town of Hospital de Orbigo along this very long Roman bridge. Just past the cathedral, I found the Auberge Karl Lessner and got a bottom bunk for €10. I showered, washed my shirt and socks, and then headed to dinner after hanging my clothes to dry in the courtyard. I enjoyed an expensive dinner of fish soup, bleached asparagus, and sea bass with a view overlooking the long bridge. On day 20, it was daybreak when I left Hospital de Orbigo. After a short walk, I had breakfast at Villares de Orbigo. After walking through farmlands, our trail took us through a plantation of pine trees, all laid out perfectly. After an hour walking through the open fields, I came across this self-service cafe with beverages, fruit, OJ, coffee, tea, and pastries run by an aging hippie Spaniard. Sue, Melissa, and Mariano showed up, and we walked together for a while after that. We crossed the railroad tracks on this peculiar bridge on the way to Astorga city center. Storm clouds gathered as we approached Astorga. There were some beautiful churches in Astorga as well as some old Roman ruins. The plazas, bars, and restaurants were filled with local people since it was a Saturday. Another beautiful mural fills this wall, similar to other cities we have hiked through. In this part of the country, they give you a free tapas when you buy a beverage, even including this lemonade. It was a couple hours gradual climb up to Santa Catalina de Somoza, where I stayed and was glad this storm cloud held off for a while. When I was almost there, Mariano caught up with me. We checked into the El Caminete albergue run by Ophelia. We were the only two staying here at a cost of 15 euros. Our pilgrim dinner of soup, vegetables, pork loin, and ice cream was 18 euros. On day 21, I started out from Santa Catalina de Somoza at dawn. It was a gradual climb from 3,000 feet up to Rabino del Camino at 4,000 feet. Here's another inspirational rock along the Camino. I stopped for breakfast at the Tessin Cafe in Rabinal del Camino. Now the vegetation changes to heather, Scotch broom, and scrub grasses. The snow-capped mountains are in the far distance. In Fonts Badon, a bus unloaded tourists who hiked 5 kilometers to the Cruz de Ferro to get a taste of what it was like to walk the Camino Santiago, and then got back on their bus. Mariano joined me at this trailer for some hot chocolate. The trail began to get very rocky with lots of heather as I approached the second summit called Punto Alto at 5,400 feet. I took out my trekking poles for the first time since my first 2 days when I crossed the Pyrenees from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. It was a very steep descent all the way to my stop for the night at Acebo, some 6 kilometers away. By the time I got to Acebo, my arms were sore from having to balance on them all the way down. It was brutal. There weren't any vacancies in the town center, so I stayed at the new La Casa del Peregrino. This was the Cadillac of all albergues. I even got a soothing massage here for 50 euros. The dorm had just 4 bunks, and it was right next to the bathroom. The shower water was hot and plentiful as long as I kept re-pushing the timer. The cost was 12 euros, another 15 euros for a pilgrim meal of French onion soup, fillet of cod smothered with pesto, with an array of steamed vegetables, bottles of red wine or water, finally creme brulee or strawberries and cream for dessert. On day 22, I left La Casa Albergue in Acebo just before sunrise. It continued to be a rocky, steep descent where my trekking poles came in very useful until it leveled out when I got to the village of Molina Seca. I enjoyed another hearty breakfast at the Maison Palacio Cafe in Molina Seca. The Camino now levels out to farmlands all the way to Ponferrada in the distance. After crossing this Roman bridge, I stopped for a snack before viewing the castle of Templars. I walked by the plazas, the clock tower, and the basilica. The Basilica Church was having Mass when I dropped in. It then began to rain as I passed by miles and miles of vineyards before I got to Cacabelas. After I got to the La Galega auberge, both Mariano and Hake from Denmark arrived. The dorm cost 13 euros, and the pilgrim meal of salad, pork loin, and ice cream was 14 euros. On day 23, Lena from the UK asked me if she could hike with me. This was her first time traveling by herself and was apprehensive. After 9 kilometers, we arrived in Villafranca del Berizo, where Lena stopped for breakfast. I visited the Ave Phoenix that my brother's family had stayed at to see Giotto, who had inscribed a shell for their daughter that read, "To Christa, may the light of the stars illuminate the road of your life," but he would not read her fortune as he had done with the others. It turned out her life was short, but brightly illuminated. Giotto was not there, but a volunteer would convey the information to him. After that emotional visit, I walked by the castle and stopped for breakfast. After crossing the bridge, I had 2 routes to choose from. One was mountainous, and the other was along the road. I chose the road route, which ran between a bubbling creek and the highway. It rained all afternoon as I walked beside the beautiful creek and ignored the highway with its fast-moving cars and trucks beyond the Jersey barrier. I entered the logging town of Trabadello with stacks of cut boards and logs. I stopped at the cafe that had my long-looked-for lentil soup with chorizo. What a treat. I followed the Ninja Turtles, named for their bright green ponchos. One was from Italy, the other South Africa. After checking into the municipal auberge in Vega del Carce at a cost of 10 euros, I got a haircut and had dinner. The Arrow Sierra restaurant served fish with vegetables, followed by the beautiful dessert that was tasty, especially the chocolate souffle for 27 euros. On day 24, I headed out just as the sky was lightening up as I passed under these highways. The Camino narrowed and was now on a muddy trail as the rains continued. I went 8 kilometers and by 3 towns before I found a place open for breakfast in La Faba. The Tito restaurant had a unique bathroom sink. The clouds began to clear as I entered the Galicia region marked by this monument. As I approached Ocibriero, I could hear a bagpiper playing. While I was having some hot chocolate and OJ, I saw Lena, who I'd hiked with the day before. She then told me it was overwhelming for her to hear the bagpiper because the last time she heard a bagpiper was at her husband's funeral. I especially enjoyed the orange juice that came out of this juicer. I saw many of these machines at cafes and bars throughout Spain and Portugal. Today was a real slog. I went from 2,000 feet up to 4,400 feet on a trail that was wet and muddy and filled with rocks. It rained all day. It was just 4 degrees centigrade and got real foggy right before I got to this beautiful auberge A Rebolera in Ponferrada that cost 13 euros and dinner was 14 euros. I met up again with Mariano, who I first met in Lyon, and Hake from Denmark, nicknamed Gandalf from his long hair and shepherd staff. The pilgrim dinner included soup, rice, stew, and a Galician cake-type dessert. The pilgrims enjoyed dancing, led by Lola, our enthusiastic host, followed by Mariano in the red checked shirt.
Oh yeah.
It was a good way to finish up a tough day. On day 25, with only 150 kilometers to go to Santiago, the sky was dark and filled with fog, and a slight drizzle at 4 degrees centigrade. I had breakfast at the Maison Betularia Cafe in Baduedo and enjoyed the warm fire. Despite the rain, this was a beautiful hike through several groves of chestnut trees that lined the trail. This is one of the most photographed chestnut trees and is over 800 years old. Just outside Traiacastella, the trail splits. One longer trail to the Samos Monastery and the other shorter trail parallels a little-used road. I chose the shorter trail. I walked through several miles of farmland where the fog drifted in and out and cows grazed. As I approach Sarria, I'm reminded that many people start the Camino in Sarria to qualify for the certificate of completion. It's a little over 100 kilometers from Santiago. This cemetery includes above-the-ground crypts, lots of plastic memorial flowers. Leaving Sarria, I hiked with Corinne from the Netherlands, and she had reservations at the Casa Barbadello. I was concerned about finding a place since so many more pilgrims started hiking from Sarria. I was in luck and even got a bottom bunk here. Dinner was stuffed pork loin with delicious sauce, so I coated the French fries, which made them palatable. On day 26, I left Barbadello Villal during a beautiful sunrise. Again, the scenery was mostly cow pastures and lines of chestnut trees. On this part of the trail, we were able to dodge the cow pies, but not the smells. I passed 3 villages before I found one that served eggs and bacon at the Mirador de Brea in Morgade. I was his first customer, but many followed. When I got to the bridge that led into Porto Marin, they were having a series of kayak races on the Rio Minho River. Just after crossing the bridge, the trail was up this massive staircase into the main part of the city. I took some pictures that advertised Porto Marin before stopping at the supermercado for my liter of orange juice. After another soggy 11 kilometers from Porto Marin, I checked into the municipal albergue in Hospital de la Cruz that was new and unfortunately near the highway sounds. It cost 10 euros and the pilgrim meal at El Labrador restaurant next door was 15. I told them no French fries, so I got a nice salad instead with my pork loin and flan. On day 27, it was another rainy day as I passed 4 villages with no food service until I got to Portos at the A Paseo Formiga Cafe. I met and walked a while with Jim, a flight attendant with Alaska Air. He was an Inuit from Kotzebue, Alaska. I told him my grandparents taught there in the 1930s. The trail got muddier and muddier, but I got my shoes cleaned on this stone path filled with rushing water. I decided to stay at the Sanero Hotel so I could clean the mud off my clothes and shoes and enjoy privacy and comfort. I used this nearby commercial laundry to wash everything, including my muddy shoes, for 8 euros. I had an uninspired pilgrim fish dinner with lots of bones to pick through, hidden in the breading at the hotel restaurant for 15 euros. The hotel was 40. On day 28, I left at daybreak. After passing by several eucalyptus plantations, I stopped for breakfast in Buente at El Alemán Cafe. Many homes have these elevated food storage sheds. Despite the rain, it was another beautiful day of walking through these forests and farmlands. Here is one of many memorials set up for people who have died with the Camino de Santiago as a special part of their lives. After a 27-mile day, I checked into the new Santa Irene Junta with no internet, no dishware or utensils in the kitchen. Although the cafe was closed for service, the Junta manager got the owner to sell us food to go, so I ordered salad, lasagna, and an apple tart. On day 29, my last day on the Camino, I was first to leave, and the other 3 would join me at the Opino Cafe for breakfast and continue with me to Santiago de Compostela. My journey was 29 days, 484 miles, with 14 days of rain and 1 day of snow. The 3 were Carolina from Mexico, Kathy from Florida, and Andy from Switzerland. I nicknamed them the Leon 3 since they started there. We were then joined by Mary from Vermont for the remaining walk to Santiago de Compostela. With grit and determination, both Carolina and Kathy limped along with sore joints and serious blisters. Over the past 29 days, I had hiked with and met over 85 people from 30 countries and 10 states in the USA, with all kinds of backgrounds and stories to share as we made our way along the Way of St. James to Santiago de Compostela. We made it through town, past a bagpiper and the cathedral and plaza to the credential office about 3 o'clock, and quickly received our credentials since they had such a smooth, efficient operation. You can see Carolina and Kathy limping their way down the stairs past the bagpiper with Andy in the green jacket ahead of them, followed by Mary. After getting our certificates, we returned to the Cathedral Plaza and took pictures of us holding the certificates. One is meeting the requirements of a 100-kilometer journey on the Camino, and the other documented my journey from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, to Santiago de Compostela. At the end of this journey, I entered the cathedral to see where the remains of St. James was. Following that, I checked into the Deneke Hotel near the cathedral at a cost of €189 for 2 nights. I had my last pilgrim dinner for €13 at the Canadu restaurant near the credential office, which included my favorite lentil soup with chorizo. Here I am at the end of my Camino de Santiago journey and on to Porto, Portugal.